He stood up in front of the entire cafeteria and said my name, not whispered it, not mouthed it across a table to a friend, not written it in a note that got passed around and laughed at. He stood up from his seat at the most populated table in the Jefferson High School cafeteria, the table where the kids with the right clothes and the right faces and the right amount of space between their bodies sat. And he said my name in a voice that carried across the entire room, and he said it like it was something worth saying. Zara. Just that. Just my name. But the way he said it, with the specific quality of someone who has been thinking about saying it for a long time and has finally decided that not saying it is the worst choice, stopped the cafeteria the way very few things stop a high school cafeteria, which is a space that has seen everything and is impressed by almost nothing. Every head turned, including mine. I was sitting where I always sat, at the end of the long table closest to the exit, which I had chosen strategically in my first week at Jefferson, because the proximity to the exit meant that the departure, when the moment came that departure was necessary, could be accomplished with minimum exposure. I had a book open in front of me. I had my headphones in, one side, the way you wear headphones when you want to signal to the world that you are occupied, but you still need to monitor the world for threats. I had my lunch, the lunch I had made myself that morning, because the hot lunch line was a geography I had learned to avoid. A long, narrow space with too many eyes on too many sides and nowhere to go when something happened. I was doing what I had learned to do in every school I had ever attended, which was take up the minimum possible space. Make yourself as small as the body you inhabit will allow. Be present without being visible. Exist in the room without giving the room anything to work with. And then Park Soo-han stood up and said my name. I pulled out my headphone. I looked across the cafeteria at him. He was looking directly at me, not at the space around me, not at the table behind me. At me. With the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who has decided where they are looking and is not interested in the social cost of the decision. He picked up his tray. He walked across the cafeteria. The room was so quiet I could hear the specific sound of his sneakers on the linoleum, a sound that in the ordinary noise of a school cafeteria would have been inaudible, but in this silence was the loudest thing in the building. I watched him walk toward me the way you watch something you cannot yet categorize, with the specific suspended processing of a brain that has received information it doesn't have a folder for. He sat down across from me. He put his tray on the table. He looked at me with those dark, clear, completely direct eyes, and he said, "Is this seat taken?" The cafeteria exhaled. Not literally, but the collective breath of 200 teenagers held and then released, rearranging itself around the new information of what had just happened. And what had just happened was Park Soo-han, who was a junior who was in the top 5 academically, who had transferred from a school in Seoul 2 years ago and had landed at Jefferson with the effortless social ease of someone who simply did not know they were supposed to struggle, had walked across the cafeteria and sat down next to Zara Williams. Zara Williams. Fat, black, quiet, nobody. He sat down next to me, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with that. If this opening just reached something in you, something you recognize from your own life or the life of someone you love, stay. Subscribe to this channel right now before we go one word further. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. People are watching from everywhere and every single name in those comments matters. Because this story, Zara's story, is about more than a cafeteria. It's about what it costs to be invisible and what it means when someone finally sees you. Now, back to the beginning. Because you need to understand who Zara Williams was before Park Soo-han sat down across from her, to understand what that moment actually cost him and what it actually meant to her. My name is Zara Williams, and I have been the biggest girl in every room I have ever entered since I was 9 years old. I want to be very precise about how I tell this part because the version that is easy to tell, the version where I am simply confident and self-loving, and my size is something I have always worn with pride, is not the true version. The true version is more complicated and more honest, and the honesty matters because there are people watching this right now who are living in bodies that the world has decided to have opinions about, and they deserve the true version. The true version is: I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, in a household full of women who were large and beautiful and loud and present. My mother, my grandmother, my Auntie Dee, who lived 2 streets over and came for dinner every Sunday without asking, bringing food she had cooked and opinions she had not been asked for. These women inhabited their bodies the way you inhabit a house you own, completely, without apology, with the specific authority of someone who has decided that the space they occupy is their space, and they will fill it as they see fit. I grew up watching them and I absorbed the lesson, or I thought I did. I thought I had the thing they had, the inhabiting without apology, the fullness of presence. I thought this until I was 9 years old and started 4th grade at Riverside Elementary, and a boy named Caleb Peters looked at me during morning circle and said, in the specific carrying voice of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned that volume is a choice, "Why is she so fat?" Not to me, about me, to the circle. As a question that was also a statement, that was also an invitation for the room to align itself around a new piece of shared information. Zara Williams is fat, and this is a thing we are all going to notice and have feelings about. The room aligned. Not all of it, not the teacher, who corrected Caleb with the quick efficiency of someone handling a fire that needs to be out before it spreads. Not a girl named Tamara who looked at me afterward with the specific apology of a person who is sorry and is not going to do anything about it. But enough of the room aligned, quickly and irrevocably, in the way that rooms do when a 9-year-old has named something and the naming has made it real. I went home that day and I stood in front of my mother's full-length mirror, and I looked at myself, really looked, the way I had not looked before because before that morning, I had not understood that looking at myself was something I was supposed to do critically, that my body was something to be evaluated and found wanting. And I began the process that I would not complete until I was 17 years old, standing in a high school cafeteria with a Korean boy sitting across from me who had said my name like it was worth saying. The process of disappearing. Not physically. I could not make my body smaller through the power of wanting it, though I tried various things over the years that I will not detail because they are private, and some of them were not healthy, and none of them worked in the way the world wanted them to work. But I disappeared in every other way available to me. I made my voice smaller. I made my footprint in every room smaller, the strategic end of table seat, the one headphone, the book in front of my face, the efficient exit. I made my expectations smaller, which is the most damaging kind of disappearing, because it is the kind that does the work of the cruelty for it. Once you have made your expectations small enough, you stop needing people to tell you that you don't deserve things. You have already told yourself. By the time I got to Jefferson High School, at 16, I was very good at being invisible. I had attended 2 other high schools before Jefferson. My family moved twice in 3 years, which is its own kind of erasure. The erasure of having to start over and rebuild the architecture of your invisibility in a new space with new people who have not yet been given the information about you that tells them what to do with you. Jefferson was the third start over. I had a system by the time I got there. First week, identify the geography. The tables, the hallways, the bathrooms that were safe and the ones that weren't, the teachers who were kind and the ones who were efficient, and the ones who were the specific kind of oblivious that mistakes management for care. Second week, establish the routes. The paths through the building that minimized exposure to the highest risk zones. The timing of hallway navigation, too early and you're in the first wave of foot traffic, where the energy is high and unpredictable, too late and you're conspicuous. The right time is in the middle of the flow where you can move without standing out. Third week onward. Maintain. I was maintaining when Park Soo hand transferred into my AP English class in October of junior year. He came in during the third week of October, which meant the class had been running for 7 weeks and had established its internal geography. Who sat where, who talked to whom, who the teacher favored, what the energy of the room was. A new person in the third week is a disruption to that established geography, and disruptions are noticed, which means the new person is noticed, which means Park Soo-han walked into AP English on a Tuesday in October, and the room noticed him. He was tall for a Korean guy, I thought, and then felt embarrassed for thinking it because it was a reductive thing to think. He was just tall. He had dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead in a way that was either carefully arranged or completely natural, and either way worked. He wore the kind of clothes that were not trying, not the conspicuous effort of someone performing ease, but the actual ease of someone who had gotten dressed without consulting an audience. He looked at the room with the specific quality of someone assessing a new space without being anxious about what the assessment would find. He sat 2 rows from me, diagonally, close enough that I could see his handwriting when he took notes, which was compact and precise. Close enough that I could see when Mrs. Ockhafer asked a question about the passage we had been assigned, that he had thoughts about it. His expression did the specific thing of someone with thoughts, a slight focusing, a gathering. He answered the question. He answered it well, not showily, not with the performative confidence of someone who knows they're smart and wants credit for knowing. He answered it the way someone answers a question when they are genuinely engaged with the material, when the question is interesting to them and the answer is something they want to share. I was sitting 2 rows away, diagonally, and I noticed all of this, and I made sure I was looking at my notebook when his eyes moved around the room after he finished speaking, because looking at my notebook was safer than being caught looking. He caught me looking anyway. Not that day. 3 days later, on a Friday. Mrs. Ockhafer had given us in class reading time, and I had finished the passage early and I had looked up, just for a moment, the way you look up when you are done with something and your eyes need somewhere to go, and he was already looking at me. Not caught looking away, not the eyes sliding off you towards something else. Looking at me, with the calm, direct attention that I was learning was his constant mode. I looked back at my notebook immediately. When I looked up again 4 minutes later, he was reading. The bullying at Jefferson took the form that bullying takes when the people doing it are old enough to understand plausible deniability. It was not the direct, unsubtle cruelty of elementary school, not a 9-year-old in morning circle, not a word shouted across a room. It was more sophisticated than that, and therefore more difficult to address. Because the more sophisticated the cruelty, the more it hides itself in the space between what happened and what can be proven. The primary architect was a girl named Brittany Cole. Brittany was the kind of girl who had organized herself entirely around social power. Who had it, who didn't, how it moved, how to accumulate it and deploy it to maximum effect. She was pretty in the specific, curated way of someone who works at it, and she was funny in the specific way of someone who has discovered that humor is an efficient delivery system for cruelty, because it gives the audience permission to laugh rather than intervene. I was not Brittany's only target. But I was a consistent one, for reasons I understood clearly. I was large, I was black in a school that was predominantly white, I was quiet, and I was good at school, which last quality was the one that genuinely puzzled me as a target until I understood that competence in a person you have decided to dismiss is threatening to the dismissal, because it requires you to revise the story you are telling yourself about why dismissal is justified. The forms it took, comments made just within my hearing, calibrated to be audible to me but deniable to a teacher, comments about what I was eating, about how I walked, about the space I occupied on a chair or a bench. Laughter that began when I entered a room and continued just long enough to be pointed without being long enough to be provable. The specific social geometry of groups that rearranged when I approached a space, not running, not shouting, just a subtle closing of the circle that communicated without words. You are not included here. And then there was the incident in November. 3 weeks after Park Sue, Han sat down across from me in the cafeteria. Before I tell you about the sitting down and what came after, I need to tell you about the incident in November, because the incident in November is why everything that happened after the sitting down was as complicated and as costly as it was. November, 3rd week. The hallway outside the gymnasium after PE. I had changed and come out earlier than most of the class because I had learned that the changing room after PE was a concentrated exposure zone. Too many bodies in too small a space, too many opportunities for the specific cruelty of comparisons. I came out early, and I was walking down the hallway toward my next class when Brittany and two of her satellites, Madison and a girl named Courtney, who was the kind of person who does not initiate cruelty, but participates in it with the specific moral cowardice of someone who believes that following is not the same as choosing, came around the corner. They saw me. I saw them see me. I did the adjustment that I always did, the shrinking, the rerouting, the angling of my body toward the side of the hallway. And Brittany made her calculation in the half-second she had before we were going to pass each other, and she made the calculation that today she had an audience and an opportunity, and she was going to use both. She did not touch me. I want to be precise about this because what she did was worse than touching, in the specific way that some cruelties are worse than others because they reach into a place that touching cannot reach. She looked at me as we passed. She looked at my body specifically, pointedly, with the slow assessment of someone conducting an inventory, and she said to Madison, but loud enough for the hallway, "God, how does she even fit through the door?" Madison laughed. Courtney laughed a half-second later, the delayed laugh of someone whose laugh is permission-based rather than genuine. I kept walking. I was very good at keeping walking. What I did not know was that Park Soo-han was coming from the other direction. He had come around the corner on the other side, just as Brittany said it, and had heard it with the complete clarity of someone close enough for nothing to be lost in the distance. I did not know he had heard it until 2 days later when Madison came to find me at my end-of-table seat at lunch, and she was not laughing. Stay with this story, because I know that what just happened in that hallway is familiar to some of you in a way that is physical. That reading it puts something in your body that you recognize. Subscribe right now. Drop your name and your city. Share this with one person who needs to hear that being invisible is not the same as being unimportant. Now, back to Zara, back to what Park Soo-han did with what he heard. Madison came to my table. She sat down not across from me, beside me, which was a geography that communicated something about what kind of conversation this was. Not a confrontation, not a performance, something private which required proximity. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice had the quality of someone who has made a decision that is costing them something. I waited. "Soo-han talked to Brittany," she said. "Yesterday, after school." I looked at her. "He saw what happened in the hallway," she said. "With you, on Wednesday, he was coming around the corner." "Okay," I said. "He didn't say anything right then," Madison said. "But he went and found Brittany after school on Thursday and he talked to her privately. I wasn't there, Courtney was there, she told me. He told her that what she said was cruel. Not wrong, not inappropriate, cruel. He used that specific word." Madison paused. "And he told her that if she did it again, he would make sure the right people knew about it." I looked at the table. "Brittany is furious," Madison said. "She's telling people he's obsessed with you and it's weird, and she's making it into a thing where he looks strange and you look, you know how she does it." "I know how she does it," I said. Madison stopped. "I wanted you to know that he did that." She left. I sat with what she had told me and I felt a complicated thing. Gratitude and discomfort, and something that I did not have a name for yet. something in the region of the chest that is distinct from the ordinary feelings and that I had not felt in a long time because I had made myself too small to feel things in that region. The discomfort was specific. I had not asked him to intervene. I had not asked anyone to intervene, ever, because asking for intervention required a belief that intervention was available to you, and I had learned a long time ago not to operate from that belief. The fact that he had intervened, without being asked, for reasons I could not yet account for, was information I did not know what to do with. The other thing, the thing in the region of the chest, I put away. I was very good at putting things away. He found me in the library on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after Madison's visit to my table. The library was one of my safe spaces. Not because libraries are universally safe for people like me, because they are not, but because the specific library at Jefferson had Mrs. Chen, who was the kind of librarian who treats every person who enters her domain as a legitimate user of the space regardless of any other information about them. And because the after-school library was quiet in the specific way that self-selecting spaces are quiet. Only the people who want to be in a library after school are in a library after school, which filters out a significant portion of the risk. I was at my usual table, corner, back to the wall, sightline to the door with my AP English essay notes when he sat down across from me. Not dramatically, not with the cafeteria announcement energy. He sat down the way you sit down when sitting down is just the thing you have decided to do, and you don't need it to be more than that. Your analysis of the invisible man is wrong, he said. I stared at him. Excuse me? Not wrong, he said. Incomplete. You're reading the invisibility as only about race, which is right, but it's also about the invisibility that happens when other people's perceptions become more real than your own existence, when you start to experience yourself through their eyes instead of your own. I looked at him for a moment. That's actually the direction I was going in the second paragraph, I said. Which you haven't read. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Show me. I showed him. He read my second paragraph and nodded with the specific nod of someone who is conceding a point they are not unhappy to concede. You're right, he said. I retract the incomplete. Thank you, I said. He did not leave. He produced his own notebook and began working. I looked at him across the table and he looked up and said, "Is this okay?" And the question was so direct and so genuine, not rhetorical, not assumed, actually asking whether his presence was okay, that I did not know what to do with it. Yes, I said. We worked in parallel for 2 hours. He asked me one question about his calculus homework. I asked him one question about a word in the passage, not because I didn't know the word, but because I wanted to see how he would answer, which sounds like a test and was a test, because I had learned to test new information before I allowed it into my operating system as reliable. He answered the word question with the specific seriousness of someone who takes a question seriously regardless of its size. He did not make me feel the question was small. He did not perform patience. He was actually patient, which is a different thing entirely. When the library closed at 5, he stood up and put his things in his bag and he said, "Same time next Thursday," like it was a given, like he was asking about logistics rather than permission. "Sure," I said. I walked home, and I did not put the thing in the region of my chest away. I let it be there, carefully, the way you carry something fragile, was aware of it, not gripping it too tightly, not yet sure what it is but not putting it away either. Over the following 6 weeks, Park Soo-han and I built something in the Jefferson High School library on Thursday afternoons that I did not have an adequate word for. We studied. We talked about the books we were reading in AP English, about the things outside of English that we were thinking about the specific experience of being in a school that was not entirely designed for either of us for different reasons. He told me about Seoul, about coming to America at 15, which he described not as a hardship but as a dislocation, the specific experience of being competent in one context and having to rebuild competence in a new one, not because you are less capable, but because the context has changed and capability is partly contextual. He said this with the equanimity of someone who has processed an experience and extracted from it what was useful. I told him about Atlanta, about my mother and grandmother and Auntie Dee and the Sunday dinners and the specific loud love of the women who raised me. He listened the way he listened to everything, completely, with the focused attention that gave each thing you said the weight of something worth saying. I told him about the other schools. Not everything, not the specifics, not the worst of it, but the shape of it, the moving and the start-overs, and the system I had developed for surviving new spaces. He listened without performing sympathy. He asked questions that told me he had been listening to the parts I said and the parts I hadn't. "The table by the exit," he said one Thursday in the 6th week. "What about it?" "That's why you sit there. Strategic exit." I looked at him. "Possibly." "I sat at your table," he said. "Instead of making you come to mine, that's why, because your table is yours." I was quiet for a moment. "You thought about that," I said. "Yes," he said, simply. I looked at my notebook. I felt the thing in the region of my chest, which had been getting harder to contain and harder to put away over 6 weeks of Thursday afternoons. "Why?" I said. And I meant it more broadly than just the table. I meant why the cafeteria, why the library, why Madison, why the hallway, why any of it. Why me? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone gathering a lie, but the quiet of someone finding the precise words for a true thing. "Because you are interesting," he said. "And you sit at a table by the exit and read with one headphone in and you think no one is paying attention and you are wrong. I have been paying attention since the 2nd week of October." I looked at him. "And because," he said, "what happened in the hallway was wrong, not just wrong, cruel. And I am not able to watch cruelty and do nothing. It is not how I am built." "You didn't do it for me," I said. "You don't know me." "I did it because it was right," he said. "I kept coming to the library because of you. Those are different things." He looked at me steadily. "You should know the difference." I let myself feel the thing in my chest, fully, without putting it away. It was the specific feeling of being seen, not observed, not assessed, but seen in the way that requires the seer to be actually present and actually looking rather than processing you through a pre-existing framework. Nobody had seen me like that in a very long time. Brittany Cole did not take Park Soo-han's intervention gracefully. This surprised no one who understood how Brittany operated, which was that social power unused is social power diminished. And a challenge to her use of social power was a challenge to the power itself, and therefore required a response. The response came in December, and it was the most sophisticated thing she had done yet, which is saying something because Brittany was sophisticated by the standards of 17-year-old social cruelty. She started a rumor, not about me, about him. The rumor was specific and targeted and constructed with the specific intelligence of someone who understands that the most effective rumors are the ones that are adjacent to things people already believe, that require only a small addition to an existing framework rather than the construction of a new one. The rumor was, Park Soo-han only spent time with Zara Williams as a social experiment. He had a bet with his friends at his old school. He was documenting the experience of befriending the most isolated person at his new school and was going to write about it for his college application essay. It was, from a pure construction standpoint, brilliant. It took something real, his attention to me, his presence at my table, the Thursday afternoons, and it put a motive under it that made everything he had done look like something else. It turned his specific, genuine attention into exploitation. It took the one thing I had been carefully, cautiously allowing myself to feel and told me it was a lie. It reached me through Destiny, a girl in my PE class who was not unkind and who came to me on a Monday morning with the expression of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have. "I don't think it's true," Destiny said. "I want you to know I don't think it's true." "But you heard it," I said. "Half the school has heard it," she said. "I thought you should know before," she stopped. "Before you heard it from someone who was telling it to hurt you." I thanked her. I went through the rest of Monday on the system I had built for surviving things, the efficiency, the roots, the strategic timing, the book in front of my face. I did not go to the library on Thursday. I texted him. I had his number by that point. 6 weeks of Thursday afternoons produces a number, produces a contact, produces a thread of messages that I had been rereading with the specific care of someone who knows they are doing something that costs something. I texted him that I couldn't make it. He responded, "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. He texted again on Friday. "I heard the rumor. I need to talk to you. Please," I didn't answer. On Saturday, he showed up at my house. I need you to stay with this, because what happens at the door of Zara's house is the scene that everything in this story has been building toward. Subscribe right now if you haven't. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. Share this with one person, and stay. Because what Park Soo-han says at that door and what he shows her is the twist that no one in this story saw coming. Not Zara, not Brittany, not me when I first heard it. My mother answered the door. I was in my room, which was where I had been for most of Saturday, inhabiting the specific paralysis of someone who has been reminded, precisely when they had begun to lower their guard, why the guard existed in the first place. My mother called my name up the stairs. Her voice had the specific quality that mothers' voices have when something has happened that they have decided to let you handle yourself, but they are very close by. I came downstairs. Park Soo-han was on my porch. He was in a jacket and he was holding, And this detail, I want to tell you this detail because it mattered and because it was so specifically him. He was holding a notebook. Not a phone, not flowers, not the props of a performed moment. A notebook. His notebook, the one I recognized from AP English and from the Thursday afternoons, the one with his compact, precise handwriting. He looked at me. He did not launch into a speech. He did not begin with the explanation or the defense. He said, "Can I come in?" I stepped back from the door. My mother, who has the specific wisdom of a black Southern woman who has seen much and learned to trust her body's assessment of people, went to the kitchen and stayed within earshot, which was her version of supervision that preserved my dignity. We sat in the living room. He put the notebook on the coffee table between us and he said, "I want you to read something." I looked at the notebook. "My college application essay," he said. "The one I submitted 3 weeks ago before any of this." I looked at him. "Read it," he said. "Please." I picked up the notebook. I found the page. I read. The essay was about his grandmother in Seoul. About the specific experience of watching her age and lose mobility and become, as he described it, progressively invisible to the world around her. Not because she had changed, but because the world had developed a limited perception of what old Korean women contained and had stopped looking past that perception. He wrote about the way invisibility is not about the person who is invisible, but about the failure of vision in the people around them. He wrote about coming to America and encountering, for the first time, the specific American varieties of this failure. The ways that race and size and gender and difference were processed into categories that stopped people from seeing the actual person inside the category. He wrote about sitting in a cafeteria on the second week of October and watching a girl at a table by the exit read with one headphone in and carry herself with a particular quality that he described as dignity under sustained pressure. And he wrote about deciding that the category the world had put her in was wrong, and that the person inside the category was someone worth knowing. He had not used my name. The essay was not about me, it was about his grandmother and about what his grandmother had taught him about looking past the category to the person, and I was present in it only as an example of a person he had decided to look at the way his grandmother had taught him to look. Not a subject, not an experiment, evidence of a lesson he had already learned. I put the notebook down. "This was submitted 3 weeks ago," I said. "Submitted and accepted," he said. "Early decision." 3 weeks ago, before Brittany said anything to anyone. He looked at me steadily. "I did not befriend you for an essay. The essay exists because of my grandmother and because of a principle I have carried since I was 12 years old. You appeared in it because you are a person who has that quality, dignity under pressure, and I noticed it. But you are not a subject to me. You are," he stopped. "What?" I said. "You are the person I look forward to Thursday afternoons more than anything else in my week," he said. "That is what you are." The living room was very quiet. My mother in the kitchen was very quiet. I looked at this boy who had stood up in a cafeteria and said my name, who had confronted a bully in a hallway without being asked, who had carried a notebook to my house on a Saturday because the only way to answer a lie was with the specific weight of documented truth. Brittany is going to keep doing this, I said. If this, whatever this is, continues, she is going to keep doing it, and it is going to cost you things, your social position. You're Zara, he said. I'm serious. I have a system. I know how to survive. But involving someone else in it, especially someone who has something to lose, Zara, he said again. I want to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it. He leaned forward slightly. I do not want to be in a social position that requires me to choose between that position and sitting across from you on Thursday afternoons. A social position with that requirement is not a position worth having. I looked at him. Also, he said, I am not particularly afraid of Brittany Cole. Something happened in my chest that was related to the thing that had been there for 6 weeks, but was larger and less containable. Something that was trying to become a laugh and was also trying to become something else. Nobody is afraid of Brittany Cole, I said. She behaves as though they are, he said. This is a correctable misperception. And I want to tell you about this because it matters, because this specific moment is the one that I return to most often when I think about what changed that year and how it changed. He reached across the coffee table and he put his hand over mine. Not grabbing, not gripping. Just covering the specific warmth of someone making contact. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Unless you ask me to, and even then I will argue. I looked at his hand over mine. I looked at his face. I thought about 9 years old and Morning Circle and Caleb Peters and the mirror and the disappearing. I thought about the systems and the routes and the strategic exits and the one headphone and the shrinking. I thought about what it had cost me, all those years of strategic smallness, and what it had produced, which was safety of a kind that was not actually safety but the absence of certain specific dangers, and whether the absence of those dangers was worth the cost of the smallness. I thought about my grandmother who inhabited her body like a house she owned. Okay, I said. Okay, what? He said. Okay, I said. Don't go anywhere. What happened next was not a movie. I want to be clear about this because the version of this story that exists in movies and in the easy tellings is the version where love arrives and the problem is solved. Where being chosen by the right person retroactively fixes the damage of having been dismissed by the wrong ones. That version is not honest, and it is not useful because it suggests that your worth is located in someone else's assessment of you, which is the exact lie that caused the damage in the first place. What actually happened was slower and less clean and more real. Brittany doubled down when she saw that the rumor had not produced the separation she intended. She escalated not to physical cruelty, which was not her style and which she was too intelligent to risk, but to the more sophisticated cruelties, the ones that targeted not just me but him, that framed his attention to me as something strange and pity-based, that suggested he was performing a virtue rather than exercising a genuine preference. She was trying to make him ashamed of me. She was trying to use the specific social mechanism that had always worked, the implication that association with Zara Williams was a social liability, and redirect it at him. It did not work on him. This is the thing about Park Soo-han that I needed time to understand. His social confidence was not the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. He had been the new kid, the Korean kid, the kid whose first language was not English. The kid who did not know the references and the shortcuts and the social geography of American high school. He had navigated all of that, and he had emerged from it with a clear sense of what mattered to him and a specific immunity to the social pressure that Brittany was deploying, because he had been through the version of it that was about his own identity and had come out the other side knowing himself. He could not be made ashamed of me because he was not ashamed of me. The social pressure that worked on people who were uncertain about their own positions could not find purchase in someone who was certain of his, but I was less certain of mine. And the escalation was affecting me in the ways it was designed to affect me, in the specific worry that my being in his life was costing him things, that the social liability was real even if he claimed it wasn't, that I was doing to him what I had always tried not to do, which was take up space in someone else's life that I had not been clearly invited into. I told him this. On a Thursday in February in the library, in the way that 6 months of Thursday afternoons produces, directly, without preamble, because we had long since moved past the kind of conversation that requires preamble. He listened. He did not dismiss what I said, he received it, which was his way, the full reception of what was said before any response. "You're describing a cost-benefit analysis," he said. "You're calculating what my association with you costs me and concluding that the cost is too high." "Yes," I said. "The flaw in the analysis," he said, "is that you are calculating my costs without asking me what I value. And what I value is not what Brittany Cole values. So her accounting system does not produce accurate numbers when applied to me." I looked at him. "You are not a cost," he said. "You are the best part of my week, the person whose thinking challenges mine, the person who finishes my sentences when I am looking for the right word and produces the right word every time, the person who reads with one headphone in by the exit because she is prepared for everything and I am trying to make a world for her where she doesn't need to be." He paused. "Zara, I am not running a cost-benefit analysis. I am telling you I want to be here. Let me be here." I looked at the table. I felt the thing in my chest that had been growing for 6 months and that I had been carefully, insufficiently containing. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "Any of it. I don't know how to be, I don't know how to let someone," I stopped. "I know," he said. "We'll figure it out together." A pause. "And you are going to have to stop calculating what you think you're worth based on what people who do not see you have decided. Because their not seeing is not information about you. It never was." The justice came in April. I want to tell you about it not because justice always comes, it doesn't, and the story of my life before April of junior year is evidence of that, but because in this specific case it came, and the form it took was not what any of us expected. It came from Courtney. Courtney, who had laughed the delayed laugh in the hallway. Courtney, who had participated in the cruelty with the specific moral cowardice of someone who believes following is not the same as choosing. Courtney, who had been carrying the weight of that belief for months and had arrived, in April, at a reckoning with it. She went to the school counselor, Mrs. Park, different Park, no relation, and she told her about the hallway. About the specific thing Brittany said. About the culture of it that had been running for the better part of the school year, targeting multiple students of which I was one. She told her about Madison's knowledge and her own. She brought receipts, and I use this word precisely because Courtney had been screenshotting things quietly for months, the digital forensics of a person who knew what they were participating in was wrong and was building, unconsciously, a record. The counselor investigated. The investigation produced consequences for Brittany that I will not detail in full because they belong to a process that is not mine to narrate. But the consequences were real and documented and produced a shift in the social geography of Jefferson High School that was not dramatic, not a single moment of public reversal, but was sustained and was real. Brittany did not become a different person. That is not how 17-year-olds work, and I would not have believed it if it had happened. What changed was the atmosphere around her behavior, the previously tacit permission that had allowed it to continue was withdrawn, and the withdrawal changed what was possible. What I felt about this was not triumph. I want to be honest about that because triumph would suggest a clean resolution, and what I felt was more complicated relief, and something that was adjacent to sadness. Because the accountability coming from Courtney's guilt, rather than from the direct consequences of the cruelty itself, meant that justice had arrived through a side door rather than the front one. And the side door arrival of justice is better than its absence, but it is not the same as the system working the way it should. Suhan held my hand through the week the investigation happened, literally in the hallway walking to class in the library. He held my hand with the specific public deliberateness of someone who has made a decision about what he is willing to be seen doing and is being seen doing it. "People are looking," I said. "Yes," he said. "You don't care," I said. "I care very much," he said. "About the right things." He looked at me. "Not about this." The twist came at graduation. Not our graduation, we were still juniors. The graduation of the senior who had been Brittany's primary source of social authority, the senior whose approval Brittany had been performing for all year in the way that second-tier social operators perform for the people above them in the hierarchy. His name was Tyler, and his departure at the end of the year produced, in the social ecosystem of Jefferson High School, a vacuum. And vacuums in social ecosystems are filled rapidly and sometimes unpredictably. What the vacuum was filled with was the particular truth that becomes visible when the authority enforcing a fiction departs. The fiction collapses. The fiction that had been sustained all year, that Zara Williams was appropriately invisible, that Park Soo-han's attention to her was strange, that the social geography of Jefferson as Brittany had organized it was the accurate one, that fiction required Tyler's authority to sustain it. Without Tyler, the fiction had to stand on its own, and on its own it turned out to be much weaker than it had appeared. The thing that happened, by September of senior year, I was not invisible. Not because anything about me had changed. Not because I had lost weight or changed my hair or modified myself in any way to meet the requirements of the framework that had required my invisibility. But because the framework had changed, and in the new framework, the person I had always been was visible. I was elected, in October of senior year, to the Student Literary Journal editorial board, not because Soo-han pushed for it, though he voted for me, but because Mrs. Ockhafer had been reading my work all year and had nominated me directly. I was in AP English and AP History, and I was excelling in both. I had made friends, not the careful, minimal, strategic adjacencies I had maintained before, but actual friends. Destiny from PE, who had warned me about the rumor, and who turned out to be funny and perceptive and someone who showed up. And a girl named Amara who was in my history class, and who had the specific quality of someone who is interested in people and makes them feel interesting by extension. And I was with Soo-han. Clearly, publicly, in the specifically uncomplicated way of two people who have decided they are together and are not interested in making it complicated. He held my hand in the hallway. He sat at my table, still the one by the exit, though I had stopped sitting there for the exit and had started sitting there because it was my table. He came to my house on Sunday afternoons and ate my grandmother's cooking and was subjected to my Auntie Dee's comprehensive interrogation, which he passed with the equanimity he brought to everything, which produced in Auntie Dee the highest available compliment in her vocabulary. He's steady. He was steady. What I learned, what I am still learning, because the learning of this kind of thing is not a one-time event but an ongoing practice, is the difference between being invisible and being unseen. I had been unseen for years. I had metabolized the not seeing as information about my worth, which is the damage that sustained invisibility does. It convinces you that the failure of other people's vision is a fact about you rather than a fact about them. Park Soo-han had looked at me the way his grandmother had taught him to look, past the category, at the person. And the person he found there was the person who had been there all along, unchanged, unreduced, carrying her full worth in a body and a life that the world had decided were not worth looking at and that were, and had always been worth everything. My grandmother always said, "The people who cannot see you are not worth adjusting yourself for. The people who can see you, they are the ones who matter." She said it in the specific context of a grandmother talking to a granddaughter about boys, and I had filed it under grandmother wisdom, which is the category in which you put things you have not yet lived enough to understand. I understand it now. I am Zara Williams, and I am 18 years old, and I am going to the University of Michigan in the fall to study literature, and I am not sitting at the end of the table by the exit. I am sitting in the middle of my own life, taking up the full amount of space that I occupy, which is the right amount of space, which is exactly as much as I need. Park Soo-han is going to Northwestern. We are 4 hours apart by car, which is a manageable distance for two people who have built something real and know the difference between manageable distance and impossible distance. We have talked about it with the specific calm of two people who trust the thing they have built enough not to panic about the space between them. Brittany Cole graduated. She is somewhere. I do not spend time thinking about where. Courtney apologized to me in May, directly, in a conversation she requested, and that I agreed to have because I believed she meant it, and because accepting an apology is not the same as absolving. It is the choice to put down the weight of the anger rather than carry it into the next chapter where it does not belong. I accepted it. I put down the weight. My mother came to every literary journal event and embarrassed me in the specific way of mothers who love you loudly and unapologetically. My grandmother came to graduation and cried, which is the highest honor she bestows, and then told me I looked beautiful, which she has always told me, and which I have always half believed, and which now I believe more fully than I did before. Not because anything about my body has changed, but because the lens through which I look at it has been cleaned by the specific solvent of being seen clearly by someone who was looking for the right reasons. Auntie D said at the graduation dinner, "I told you he was steady." She had said no such thing in advance of the events that proved her correct. This did not prevent her from claiming credit. This is what aunties do. I am not the end of the table. I am not the one headphone. I am not the strategic exit and the minimum footprint and the book in front of the face. I am Zara Williams and I take up space, and I am worth taking up space, and I have a boy who stood up in a cafeteria and said my name like it was worth saying, who is going to Northwestern and who texts me in the morning and holds my hand when I need it and argues with me about books, and who looked past the category to the person and found in the person everything he was looking for. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. That is Zara's story. Every single word of it. And if you have spent any part of your life making yourself small in the ways she described, the one headphone, the strategic exit, the minimum footprint, I want you to hear this. The people who do not see you are not seeing you because of a failure in you. They are not seeing you because of a failure in them. And you do not need to adjust yourself down to the size of someone else's limited vision. Subscribe to this channel right now. We are here every single week with stories like this one, stories about real people surviving real things and coming out the other side into something true. Drop your name and your city in the comments right now. We want to know who is in this room. People are watching this from everywhere, from Atlanta and Seoul and London and Lagos, and everywhere in between, and every single name matters. Share this video with one person. The person who is sitting at the end of the table by the exit. The person with the one headphone in. They need to hear Zara's story. And next week, we are bringing you the story of a woman who found out, 20 years after graduating college, that the scholarship she had been told she didn't receive had actually been awarded to her, and that someone in her own family had intercepted the letter. What she discovered about who did it and why will change everything you think you know about the people closest to you. We're calling it, She Thought She Didn't Get the Scholarship. 20 years later, she found the letter. Set your reminder. You need to be here. Please subscribe and press the bell icon. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. And to every girl who has ever sat at the table by the exit with one headphone in, making herself as small as possible, you are not small. You never were. Someone is going to stand up across a crowded room and say your name like it's worth saying. Because it is, it always was.